What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Today, we are going to talk about every ambiguous backfield in fantasy football this year, who to target from each, where they are currently going in terms of, ADP all over the place right now, and what I think are some realistic range of outcomes for the winners of the backfield, every single backfield that we're going to talk about. Because every single year we get like 2, 3, 4 guys that end up like on a lot of winning teams and just kind of help you coast to either get to the playoffs or get through the playoffs and help you win it all. Last year it was Cam Scatterby before his injury. Javonte Williams came out of nowhere. Travis Etienne ended up winning the backfield in Jacksonville. Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell on the exact same team, on a team that we didn't think was going to even have one reliable running back, and they ended up having two. Rico Dowdle was really, really good for certain stretches when Chuba Hubbard was back and even when he got back. So yeah, let's kick this thing off. Let's not waste any more time. And today I want to talk about probably maybe the most intriguing, maybe I guess polarizing backfield, and we're going to talk about the Carolina Panthers, and the two guys that I think you should be realistically looking at to secure the number one role, and the two guys that I think are actually going to be the two main players in this backfield are Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks. And I mainly wanted to start with these guys because, yeah, it's just probably the most polarizing right now because Jonathan Brooks has been on a rise that I don't think I've seen probably since I started playing fantasy football. Maybe I can't remember, but a guy who didn't play last year has played like 11 total snaps in his entire career. He's coming off his second ACL tear in 3 years. We've really never seen him play. I mean, I was a big fan of him coming out of Texas a couple of years ago in the 2023 NFL draft. He was taken in the second round by the Panthers. So, I just kind of imagined that the reason why we're seeing this rise is because, one, he was a pretty good prospect, but also because there's a lot of juice left. There's not a lot of mileage on him. I know that the injuries have been pretty frustrating. An ACL injury isn't great, but I don't think it's the worst in the grand scheme of things when it comes to, out of all the injuries he could have had in the NFL. He didn't break anything. He didn't tear his Achilles, anything like that. But the Carolina Panthers are probably going to want to see what they have left out of this guy that they drafted just a couple of years ago. Spent some, high draft capital on him, but the main reason why that I really think that Jonathan Brooks is so interesting is because all the reports out of camp have been incredibly bullish. The narrative has been nothing but positive all summer long, even leading up to it. Beat reporters are assuming that he's going to have like a more than enough opportunity to compete for this starting job, or at the very least, like split carries with Chuba Hubbard. And when it comes to Chuba Hubbard, that is a different narrative that I think a lot of people are, I guess, forming on him this year because last year he was a guy who was probably one of the bigger busts in fantasy football because in 2024, the year before last, he had 16.1 points per game, and it dropped all the way down to 8.4 in 2025, which is, yeah, he pretty much lost his starting role to Rico Dowdle. It was a rough year. He was banged up. Just not very good. And I think that's that's another big reason why people are so high on Jonathan Brooks and why they're so excited is because, yeah, I think there's a reason to be skeptical that, Chuba Hubbard doesn't have a very good grip on the starting role, just how bad he was last year and kind of how he's only out of that 1 year in 2024, he hasn't been really good outside of that. The ADPs of both guys are around, they're kind of around the same range in most up-to-date sites. And I think by the beginning of September, or at least I believe now, Brooks is pretty much, I cleared Hubbard by just a little bit. And I think that maybe when we get like 2-3 weeks out from now, I think he'll be the very clear favorite in this backfield when we get closer to week 1 in fantasy football. So as far as I am playing things out right now, I am definitely in the Jonathan Brooks camp. I love the upside. I loved him coming out of Texas. The profile was incredibly strong, aside from the injuries, of course. But it's hard to deny that things just are kind of lining up for him. Beat reporters, coaches, media, they can't stop talking about him. He's finally healthy. Chuba Hubbard was really hard to watch last year and got his job taken by Rico Dowdle, who they actually let walk in free agency. So I think that's even more of a reason to be bullish on Jonathan Brooks. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I've taken very little Hubbard in like the 100 drafts that I've done so far this offseason, and I don't plan on taking much more, especially I know he's continuing to dip a little bit. Maybe I start to pick up on that price as he gets like more outrageously cheap and Brooks starts to pass him even more. But yeah, I just think it's fair to have reservations about both, but especially Chuba Hubbard. I think that if you want to dig into Brooks's, negatives, I think that the injury concerns are very, very real. We haven't seen, just but a couple of snaps from him, playing in the NFL. And yeah, I just think that there are some things to be worried about, but the upside is very real with Jonathan Brooks is if he is able to win this job outright, dethrone Chuba Hubbard and kind of take over this Panthers backfield. I understand that it's a little bit of a question mark when it comes to the offense overall because the Panthers aren't great, but yeah, I just think that he's a good upside swing to take. Unless he just starts to get outrageously expensive and he's going in around like 6, I get a little bit more nervous about that. But in terms of where he's going right now, I think the rise is pretty warranted just based off the buzz we're getting in camp. Just the talent that I think that differentiates these two. I think that Jonathan Brooks is far more talented. We'll see what he looks like coming off the injury, but I want to pick the winner here, and I think it's going to be Jonathan Brooks. I think the guy has far more upside than Chuba Hubbard. We've seen what he can do outside of that 1 year. I think it was just kind of lined up for him perfectly, and I think that's kind of where it's leaning towards right now with Jonathan Brooks. I think he's the best choice with the strongest profile, and I think he's going to win this backfield. And I think you should be targeting him in all your drafts, especially if he continues to go pretty late in like Sleeper, ESPN, things like that. Especially if you're drafting early, he's a guy who would scoop up in the 9th to 10th round, maybe even later if you can get him around there. So as we move on here, let's talk about another interesting backfield. We're going to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and another really interesting one because we have another exciting player in the mix that a lot of people tend to be in on already. He's already, it seems that the community has already chosen a winner at the moment and the guy that they're more in on, but I think it's worth, talking about because it technically is an ambiguous backfield. Bashal Tutin is definitely the favorite at this point in the offseason, just based on everything that happened in the offseason, letting Travis Etienne walk in for agency. They didn't add any competition in the NFL draft. They only went out inside Chris Rodriguez, who is the other guy we're going to talk about. I think it was just for $5 million a year. I think he signed a 2-year, $10 million deal, but it just signals how much confidence they're going to have, or if they plan to have, in Tutin going into year 2. Tutin is going at the very beginning of round 4. He's risen quite a bit since the beginning of the offseason, or since, drafts have really opened up after the NFL draft. And he's been one of mine and a lot of other people's favorite prospects last year. His athleticism, his speed, receiving usage, his profiles, just all around, I think it's incredibly intriguing. Regardless of the day 3 capital, I just think the draft class that he was in with that stacked running back draft class and the fact that he was taken right in the middle of Woody Marks and Cam Scatterbo. I know a lot of people may scoff at round 4, but the draft capital that he received just outside of the top 100 is incredibly enticing in the fact that they let Etienne walk. All these things are kind of lining up for him. But yeah, Tutin, I think he goes in the round. He goes at the end of round 4. He's kind of mostly in round 5 in most sites that you'll see. And I think a lot of people are very aware of the upside that he possesses. Yeah, I think he's incredibly tantalizing. He's a guy I'm going to be targeting if he falls into the 5th round and I need an RB2. Just a guy with a lot of upside. A lot of interesting, even if he doesn't get like the full workload, not a full workhorse role, incredibly explosive. He's going to be used as a receiver, going to break off big chunk plays in a good offense. So yeah, I love Tutin. I'm going to be honest with you guys. He's the guy I expect to be the winner, but let's talk about Chris Rodriguez for a second, because I do think there are some alarming question marks in his profile, just based off of the first couple of years in the NFL, because yeah, that gives probably more people, even more of a reason to target Tutin, just how weak his profile is. For one, up until like the tail end of last season, he had pretty much done absolutely nothing. Even more alarming is the fact that he has just 6 catches in his first 3 years in the NFL. Right away, not someone I'm incredibly interested in targeting it like at all, and definitely not someone with a super high ceiling in fantasy, especially even if Bashal Tutin were to get injured and he has the entire backfield to himself. I think he could be interesting, but the ceiling is definitely capped if he's not going to catch the ball out of the backfield. Thankfully, I think his ADP is more than valued. I don't necessarily hate taking him in some drafts. His ADP has seemed to already be baking in the weak profile. His production in the NFL, the fact that he's kind of injured, he had a foot injury and he may not even be ready for week 1, which is even more of a reason to be in on Tutin, just seeing what he could do early on in the season without Chris Rodriguez before he comes into the fold. With all that being said, I think it's incredibly obvious. I'm in on Tutin. I expect him to be one of the best picks in round 5 as long as he stays there and doesn't creep too much higher. But yeah, I was a little early on him last season, so I'm very intrigued to see how he takes advantage of this opportunity with no ETN, with a banged up Chris Rodriguez, and kind of a backfield all to himself. I'm really, really excited. I think all you should be too as well. If you're not as familiar with Bashal Tutin, I would get familiar with him, especially with this video. It's a good exercise to get familiar with him. So yeah, usually someone like Chris Rodriguez is just kind of, finish with him. I do think they're, where he's going right now is perfectly fine. They paid him a decent amount of money. He's going to be at least have a role on this team. He can be useful in your lineup some weeks if you have a bye week, if have any injuries. If Tutin were to miss any time, like I said, he could be interesting. He could be a guy you could just stick as, he may not be an RB2, but he could be like a high-end RB3, a guy who could fall in the end zone a couple of times this year, even with Bashal Tutin in the lineup and him producing. maybe a guy you can stash late rounds on your bench, can be useful in some spots during the season. Okay, let's move on here, and maybe I should have put this team second, but let's talk about the Denver Broncos, primed to be one of the best offenses in the NFL, and maybe the best offense with an ambiguous situation at running back currently. The candidates here are J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey, and I know that Jonah Coleman is interesting to a lot of people, including myself. I loved him as a prospect. I think he's a really, really good player, but that may be something we talk about in 2027 or something that comes into play as a waiver option if J.K. Dobbins were to get injured, which unfortunately is going to play into how I view J.K. Dobbins, but more of like a second half into the year play if his role continues to grow, but just a name to keep an eye on as we go through camp. These are the exact two players we were deciding between last year, so it's going to be interesting to see what changes because we were drafting R.J. Harvey way above J.K. Dobbins, and yeah, if you aren't familiar, basically J.K. Dobbins was the early down grinder last year, and he got most of the carries and the snaps in this offense. R.J. Harvey was pretty much a scat back, third down, pass down specialist until Dobbins went down towards the end of last season, which he kind of seems to do just about every single year at this point. We've been robbed of a lot of J.K. Dobbins because of injuries, and it's unfortunate. It's continued. I don't expect it to necessarily change. It kind of seems like it's just a trend with him. Yeah, only then did we get to see what R.J. Harvey could actually do. And in that stretch, he was pretty good in fantasy football. I'll be honest with you. He was pretty good. He was a bit inefficient, but put up fantasy points. And not that this isn't abnormal for a rookie, although I do think it is kind of concerning in and of itself that with all that opportunity, or he didn't get any of that really opportunity until Dobbins went down with an injury. And then it was kind of, okay, R.J. Harvey, you're going to get the role. But when Dobbins was healthy, it was a lot more Dobbins. So like the question is what changes this year is because we have, like I mentioned, Jonah Coleman added to the mix. A lot of the offseason moves didn't signal that the Broncos were ready to hand the keys over to R.J. Harvey because they signed Dobbins to a 2-year deal. I think it's basically a 1-year deal. They can move on from him after this year. It was for like $10 million a year, which is pretty lucrative. It's pretty good type of money. I know that some other teams were after Dobbins, so that's another reason to be a little bit concerned about R.J. Harvey's role changing this year. And of course, like I mentioned, they took Jonah Coleman with some pretty good draft capital in the 4th round of this past draft. The ADPs of Dobbins and Harvey give us a good idea of how people are kind of feeling about this. And I guess here's kind of how I'm viewing it, because there's a ton of uncertainty surrounding R.J. Harvey's role in this offense, if it's going to grow. I kind of think that's baked into where he's going in the drafts. But at the same time, there's a lot of questions just around Dobbins in general. He consistently gets injured and misses large portions of the season, virtually every season since he was drafted in the NFL, like we just mentioned. And how am I playing this? Because I think that it's changed a little bit just based on how I kind of anticipated me feeling about it. I actually like R.J. Harvey, I'm going to be honest with you, a lot more than I do Dobbins. I know it's weird, but I really don't love Harvey that much, so maybe that tells you how I feel about this backfield overall, or just J.K. Dobbins overall. I just like, once again, the upside swing of Harvey in drafts, where he's going, his ability as a receiver. If he gets a role expanded in year 2, I want to keep my imagination open, to that being the case, to that possibly happening. On the other hand, he might just be really, really frustrating if Sean Payton decides to do like a 2 to 3 way committee between all 3 of these running backs. And none of these guys really get home in a nice way. Maybe they're just all kind of like decent floor guys, and maybe one pops each week and we kind of just don't know what. But yeah, I think R.J. Harvey at this point is just my best bet. And I think he isn't egregiously priced, kind of how someone like Travion Henderson is, who's in a bit of a committee himself. Dobbins, on the other hand, let's talk about him a little bit, because he's okay. All right, like I mentioned, his floor, it's solid, but the upside, it's capped. And the reason it is because his lack of receiving work, his inability to stay healthy, all of these things put together. I also worry, once again, Jonah Coleman comes into the fold, and maybe he's playing a lot into how I view not just R.J. Harvey, but especially J.K. Dobbins, because I think that they may view, there's a small chance of this happening, and maybe a little bit unpopular, but he may view like him as Jonah Coleman taking the J.K. Dobbins role eventually. They kind of have the same type of skill set, with Jonah Coleman just being a little bit of a better pass catcher, but Jonah Coleman's bigger, kind of built the same way as J.K. Dobbins. And I think the draft capital is it's more than enough of a reason to kind of ask these type of questions, because we want to keep our imagination open though. And I think that's exactly why I'm just unsure. We kind of just don't know at this point. Sean Payton's a little bit weird. On the other hand, like if you were to take J.K. Dobbins, I think he's okay. He could, though. He could just stay healthy for a good portion of the year. He could score a bunch of touchdowns in a really good offense. I think that, there are some there's some positives to both Dobbins and Harvey. Just it's a little bit weird, and we really don't know at this point what's going to happen in year two if things are going to look any different. But I'm trying to keep my imagination open, excuse me. But if you're looking for upside, it's RJ Harvey at his ADP. He is cheaper than basically almost every single year two running back. He's going to be operating in that pass catching role on a good offense. Plus, I think that there is realistically some room for growth if Sean Payton decides to give him more work in that area. If you're looking for safety, someone with a nice floor, J.K. Dobbins is probably your guy. As long as he's healthy, I think he plays a lot, gets a lot of carries. It's just a matter of how much he plays. How long is he able to stay healthy before he eventually goes down with an injury? I might go like a different direction. Just stay away from him. I think that, in your standard two running back, two receiver, like one flex, like shallower leagues, I think he's a guy I might just want to opt for like a quarterback in that range. An upside at tight end, maybe there's a rookie receiver going in that range that is a lot more enticing to me. Either way, he's relatively cheap on most sites. It can be useful as like a RB3, RB4 on your bench as someone you could, fill in for bye weeks. Maybe you just need him to be reliable before someone like, Jadarian Price gets going. I don't know. Something like that. I know it's a little bit mixed here on the Broncos backfield, kind of a little all over the place, but basically what I'm trying to say is RJ Harvey's your upside guy who could, your two running back, second round draft capital last year, be a guy that expands his role and is really, really good. Dobbins could be, just a nice floor play. Not going to have a very high ceiling, not going to get any receiving work, but could score some touchdowns at the goal line. But yeah, probably the most like question mark backfield out of all of them is the Denver Broncos, because it could just be one of them. It could be just be like last year where Dobbins is the guy, RJ Harvey's in a complementary role, or it could be just like a two to three way committee. There's a whole bunch of different scenarios, and I want to be open to all of them. I'm struggling. I might need you guys to help me out on what y'all are thinking about with the Denver Broncos backfield. But let's move on here. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, because for this matchup, we got Jaylen Warren versus Rico Dowdle. And to give people a little bit of a refresher, Dowdle is essentially filling that void that Kenneth Gainwell left in free agency. He went over to Tampa Bay, but with a slightly different role than Gainwell had in this offense. Looking at the ADP of both players, on most sites, you'll find that Jaylen Warren has the edge pretty much everywhere. He is probably, in my opinion, one of the more underrated backs in the NFL over the past couple of years and has been really, really good in fantasy. I mean, last year he was around 13.5 points per game. He was inside the top 24, or I believe inside the top 20 at the position. And just to be straightforward, Warren is the guy that I'm definitely leaning towards this year, especially in full PPR formats. If you're in a standard format, which I hope you guys are playing PPR at this point, or half PPR, maybe you move Dowdle and Warren closer together. But I think that, the way that Warren has looked, he's been on this team for a while now. He knows the offense. He's just the guy I'm leaning towards as the target I'm going to be, having in drafts this upcoming year. And I'm not expecting the Steelers offense to be like top half of the league or anything, but I do really, really like the hiring of Mike McCarthy as head coach a lot. I mean, McCarthy has always been incredibly pass heavy, and pretty much all of his offenses, when he was in Dallas, just a guy or a head coach that I think is maybe not the best head coach, but at the same time, his offenses seem to be scoring pretty well. I think that's good for Warren. He's going to be the guy on third downs. He's going to be out there catching a lot of passes. He's going to be, catching a lot of checkdowns from Aaron Rodgers, who has one of the highest checkdown rates in the NFL. I believe he was inside the top 5 at like 11%. And I think that last year, it's even more of a reason to be excited about Jaylen Warren is him and Gainwell's roles were very overlapping last year, because they were, there wasn't as much of a differentiation between the two, because Gainwell was also a good third down back as well. He took a lot of those checkdowns from Jaylen Warren, although they were both inside the top 20 at the position in points per game. If you decide to go like hero running back in your draft, so that means like starting with, let's say you take Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, or you take one of these first round running backs, or take a second round running back, and you want to wait till the 7th, 8th round, you can take Jaylen Warren as your RB2. He's one of the more safe options you can get after that tier of running backs like DeAndre Swift, Jadarian Price, and Quinshon Judkins. Even though I love Warren this year, I can acknowledge that he does have a little bit of a capped ceiling. The Steelers aren't going to be world beaters on offense, and I think that Rico Dowdle will vulture some goal line touches, some in between the carries, or in between the 20s carries. He's going to cut into that snap share quite a bit, because Jalen Warren's never been like a full-time workhorse running back or even like completely out-snapping the other guy in the backfield. So I think it's going to be a little bit capped in my opinion. Speaking of Rico Dowdle, although he isn't my choice of the two, I think that he is going to have some value this year. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be probably like a great value J.K. Dobbins, I guess is the best way to put it. Because honestly, he's been a damn solid running back the past 2 seasons. In Carolina last year, taking over Chuba Hubbard's role, or taking over the role from Chuba Hubbard, and in Dallas the year before that, where he had a sneaky good year. He was one of the best late round running backs to grab in fantasy. Yeah, because he just won it and just ran with it the entire year. So to add on to this, I mentioned earlier, 2 Steelers running backs were able to finish as top 24 or top 20 options last year at the running back position. Gainwell was like right behind Warren in points per game. And I don't think the talent differentiation between Rico Dowdle and Kenneth Gainwell is that far apart, because we've seen a lot more from Rico Dowdle in his career than we have from Kenneth Gainwell. So I think that has, a lot to do with, I think that their ADPs being closer together. If Dowdle can find himself a good role as an early down runner, get some key goal line touches, I think, he can be, like I mentioned, a great value J.K. Dobbins in just a little bit of a worse offense. He is like a completely fine target as an RB3, RB4. He can be flex worthy at times in deeper leagues. During bye weeks, he can be, plugged into your lineup, or just due to injury if you need a guy to just fill that void for a while. Again, he's kind of like J.K. Dobbins in shallower formats. I might try to look for some swings at quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end in that range, and might pass on him. But yeah, some deeper leagues, incredibly interesting. Maybe not deeper leagues, but deeper lineup leagues, so like multiple flexes. And yeah, I actually like both running backs this year, but I overall think I think the backfield is set up best for Jalen Warren. You can see Dowdle have some nice value in some weeks, especially where he, is able to fall into the end zone multiple times. Or let's just say that something happens to Jalen Warren. I think he can be perfectly fine. He's going to be probably more like a top 15 to 20 option weekly if Warren were to go down, because he would have that entire backfield to himself. Once again, Mike McCarthy is incredibly underrated as a guy who can operate an offense. They're going to score a lot. They're going to pass a lot. Aaron Rodgers checks down. So yeah, I like both of these Steelers running backs, but I'm leaning towards Warren. And I think that you can be on the lookout for them both being top 36 options in fantasy at the position this year. So I like it a lot. Let's move on here to the Washington Commanders. The 2 biggest players are going to be Rachaad White and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, one of the least talked about ambiguous backfields of all, at least from kind of what I've seen this offseason, and I flip-flopped back and forth. I kind of just have been going back and forth. I like Rachaad White a little bit. I like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. I like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt a lot early on, a little bit more leaning towards Rachaad White right now. I'm really not sure why this backfield isn't being talked about more, because I think the Commanders offense has a really, really good chance to be, more top half of the league, especially going back to the version that they were during Jaden Daniels' rookie year. I think whoever is running behind Daniels is going to be pretty much guaranteed to be efficient with those carries. I have a little bit of a disclaimer here. Yes, I think I was a little bit higher on Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt a couple of months ago. He was a guy I wanted people to target. I apologize. I'm going to walk back my take just a little bit, because I like Rachaad White now. I'm kind of seeing the vision on him. His role as a pass catcher, pass blocker, his chemistry with Jaden Daniels. He's a little bit more of a veteran. We saw, glimpses from JCM last year, but I think altogether, I think that Rachaad White's collection of work in the NFL is just a little bit more impressive, and he catches the ball more. So that's another reason why I think I should be a little bit more in on Rachaad White than I was before. Also, this was recent news. I didn't have this kind of baked in going in, but Laremy Tunsil goes down with a torn triceps, and he is one of the better tackles in the NFL. So I think that hurts both of these guys. I'm probably going to move them down just a little bit. Maybe you should just be a little bit wary of that when you're drafting. I think a lot of people aren't going to be talking about that as much, but Laremy Tunsil being out does not help the fact that this Commanders offense was not very good last year, and we need them to protect Jaden Daniels, and we want them to take a step forward. So I think that hurts just a little bit. Also, something that I think hurts to admit is I got a little bit too ahead of myself with JTM. My bags were kind of packed on him. I thought he was pretty impressive as a rookie. But I think that in actuality, I think that the only way for Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt to truly smash big time is he would have that full goal line role taken away from Rachaad White. He doesn't get any of those looks. He's get that full in between the tackles, like J.K. Dobbins-ish role. And I'm just not exactly sure if that comes to full fruition. And on top of it, he doesn't play on passing downs as much. If we go back and we take a look at Rachaad White's profile, who I think we should definitely be diving into now, while he was in Tampa, it was, pretty obvious that he was just a guy who's a pest. Another reason why I've kind of cooled off on my Ja'Cory Kroski merit love. Sure, I understand he got unseated by Bucky Irving, but I mean, he's racked up 50, 64, 51, and 40 catches in his first 4 seasons in the NFL. And he racked up 40 catches last year as a guy who really wasn't involved in the offense because of Bucky Irving's role and kind of just basically phasing him out because of how good Bucky was as a pass catcher. Just thinking about it more, I think it's clear that White has the receiving role on lock. I don't know how much room JCM has to kind of operate in that area, but that's a pretty good upper hand to have when you're trying to pick the winner of an ambiguous backfield. White and JCM, they're pretty close. They're maybe like a round apart at the very most. So that kind of has made me scramble a little bit more towards Rachaad White, which, maybe isn't the greatest process, but I think that whichever side you on, I think it might be smart to hedge your bets if you are a volume drafter like me. I know a lot of people are, like that aren't out there. They draft like 1-2 teams, but if I had to maybe take one guy, if I had one team, if I had to take one of these guys, it'd probably be Rachaad White, just because I think the safety of the pick, he's almost guaranteed to have a role, especially as a receiver. And also at the same time, I do see a lot of similarities to what Javonte Williams was last year in Dallas, someone who signs for super cheap in free agency, and who's just really, really productive based on the lack of, I guess, real competition in this backfield. Because although I do like JCM, he is a little bit unproven and a running back that, let's just be realistic, was a 7th-round pick last year. I'm not sure it looks as pretty as Javonte's. I don't think we're going to have a ton of guys that do that from year to year, but as long as he's scoring points, I really, really don't care how it looks. JCM can be viable. I do think there's a shot he wins the job. Possibly he can be productive, but I think honestly, I would put it as like a 65-35 split between how I feel about Rachaad White in favor of him compared to JCM, and just the, how far apart I view them in winning the job outright. Rachaad White should be a guy that I think you have circled on your boards. He has all the goods to smash at his ADP. The pass production, he's going to be going in like the 9th, 10th round. He's a lot of similarities to Javonte Williams. I think that's probably the best case scenario, but I think at the very, I think a middling range where we could see him produce this year is kind of what Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Warren did last year in Pittsburgh, like that 13 point per game range. Like I said, he's got a lot of proven production in the past, has a receiving role in this offense, and coexists in an offense that makes things a lot easier for running backs to be efficient on the ground with Jaden Daniels at quarterback, which is something that Rachaad White has struggled with. So I like Rachaad White this year. I'm more convinced on him at the moment. So as we move on to the last team here, the last ambiguous backfield we're going to talk about is the Minnesota Vikings. Another fun offense. We're mainly choosing between Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. Another backfield that I had a stance on early on, but my process has kind of evened out as the summer has gone along, as the offseason has gone along. At first, I was really loving the ADP of Aaron Jones. I was scooping him up everywhere in round 10, 11, and I get it. He's a little bit older. He's a little dusty, but in best ball in general, which is kind of what I'm doing a lot of these drafts on, I just think he's a little bit more enticing. Also in lineup formats as well, if you just need depth, he's kind of a quality option for a guy to have during some bye weeks, and maybe just having your lineup in general if he does have some of that, older Aaron Jones, or I guess younger Aaron Jones juice left in him. However, as the summer has gone along, I have come around a bit on Jordan Mason. I didn't really understand the hype early on because he just really hasn't done much in the NFL. With the exception of that short stint with the 49ers when CMC got hurt, everybody was in on Jordan Mason for like that 8 weeks that I think he started. He was phenomenal. And then he went down with injury, and that was kind of all we saw from Jordan Mason the rest of the year. He's never had a year above, I believe, I think it's maybe above 9 points per game in fantasy football, which is not great, not a great past track record to kind of, I guess, dream on is kind of where I'm putting it. As you should though, and something that I have been improving on, something that I struggle with, is I need to widen my imagination on things because, yes, I've been incredibly high on Kyler Murray coming into this Vikings offense, elevating just about everybody on that team, especially Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I believe in Kevin O'Connell. So why shouldn't I at least be open-minded to Jordan Mason taking over this backfield, especially with kind of how old Aaron Jones is? And after digging into his profile for a bit, I was actually pretty surprised how good his season-long numbers were last year. It kind of surprised me. It shocked me. I just don't remember him doing much at all, but he was pretty decent in certain stretches. In a year that the Vikings offense, was unwatchable, he managed to be pretty productive. He had 800 yards, basically, 6 touchdowns, nothing groundbreaking, but pretty solid in an offense that was pretty putrid most of last year with JJ McCarthy at quarterback. I have kind of surrendered as well to the reality that Mason could just be the goal line back in this offense. There's been a lot of talk about him, just being the guy at the goal line and scoring those touchdowns. And when you're in a good offense, I think that 10 plus touchdowns in a season is pretty realistic, especially with how much I envision the Vikings moving the ball. Kevin O'Connell's pretty awesome. And at his current ADP, whether it's, regular lineup or best ball, he would be paying off big time. A guy that I, once again, am going to be switching my priors on. Like Rachaad White, I am much more in on him than I was earlier in the offseason. I've shifted a little bit. And just a guy I don't have to worry about being, as old as Aaron Jones, because he does have a lot working for him. He's much younger than Aaron Jones. He's apparently the favorite to handle the goal line role, according to his head coach, and is going to be having improved quarterback play with Kyler Murray under center. And the only caveat is that he hasn't been really productive at all in the receiving game. I think that's definitely a hole to poke and kind of caps his ceiling, kind of like we talked about with J.K. Dobbins. It's a little bit of a big deal, I get it, but I think he can pay off where he's going in the 9th, 10th, 11th round in drafts right now. And a guy I think that he could surprise a lot of people and just be a guy you could be having in your lineup. He could be a safe option, score a couple touchdowns week to week. Let's move on to Aaron Jones, though, because I definitely think he warrants some love, especially for a guy who can go later rounds. I might be a little more down on him, but I acknowledge that Aaron Jones, man, he's done it before. He's a great receiver out of the backfield. And let's be real, the older running back in fantasy hitting at a later ADP or at his ADP has been a bit of a trend the past couple of years. Derrick Henry, James Conner, Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, even Aaron Jones himself averaged 14 plus points per game at age 29 a couple of years ago. So he's one of the more underrated backs of the past decade. I really don't want to put it past him to produce just like one more time, especially in a good offense. But I have my questions, and there were some red flags last year. He was consistently banged up last year. He played through injuries, and maybe that was a drop off in his game, and maybe that was just the offense that he was operating in general. Maybe he was just hurt on top of the offense being bad. I don't know, but I do want to acknowledge the red flags. I want to keep my imagination open to just Aaron Jones just maybe got old last year, and we were seeing the remains of a running back who has been really, really good throughout his career. I think a lot of that had to do with JJ McCarthy and the overall offense, but like I mentioned, I don't want to completely throw it out altogether. If I had to pick, though, I think I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Jordan Mason. I think it's like 55-45, maybe even closer to 50-50. I guess it probably depends how I feel in the moment, how I'm structuring my team overall, but I think that maybe both of these guys could return some super nice value. If you are like a bit of an ageist and you don't love older running backs, then I would probably think that Jordan Mason is your guy. If you want to follow the trend of an older running back beating his ADP, you might want to lean Aaron Jones. I don't think either of these guys are going to be like the Javonte Williams or Travis Etienne of last year. I don't think that either is set up for like that type of volume. I think that it's going to be a little bit more of a split than we think. However, just like I mentioned, who says that they can't be the Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell of this season? Both running backs hitting and being very, very viable week to week, especially in a good offense with, Kyler Murray coming in, with Kevin O'Connell, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. A lot of attention is going to be taken off the running back position, and just want to make incredibly excited to see how it plays out. I'm going to be taking a bit of both, a little bit more of a volume drafter, but yeah, if I had just one team, I think I might lean Jordan Mason, depending on how my build is in the moment. But that's going to be it for this video, talking about all the ambiguous backfields. I didn't go in a particular order, but I think that definitely the most interesting is going to be the Carolina Panthers. I love Jonathan Brooks this year. I love Jaylen Warren in Pittsburgh this year. There's a lot of interesting backfields that I think, is going to have a big effect on fantasy football this year, because some of these guys are really going to crush their ADP. We might see another Javonte Williams and Travis Etienne this year. I think Rachaad White is incredibly interesting in that aspect, just based on, how the amount of money he signed. He's going incredibly underrated, under the radar. But nonetheless, tell me how you guys are feeling. Who do you think are the winners of these backfields? Who are you targeting this year? Do you love any of these late-round running backs, or are you just kind of trying to get your running backs out of the way early in drafts and taking your shots at receiver, quarterback, tight end, the rest of your drafts? We got a couple of weeks, though. I think we have our first preseason game just a couple of days ago, but we have our first, week 1 preseason coming up. I'm incredibly excited to just get more and more in depth with you guys as we hear more and more. Hopefully Luther Burden is okay. A lot of interesting stuff to go and talk about throughout the offseason. So I'm incredibly excited, but I'm going to get out of y'all's hair. I've been talking a while now. So hope everybody is having a fantastic week. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.